One is in Athens, Georgia.
At the AFP University.
Yes. I do a lot of professor. My daughter is.
I was going to guess. I was always speaking of the program, but yeah, it was Thursday night.
Good.
Yes, it's very good, well worth seeing. The singers are great. The orchestra doesn't either.
I heard Tower was,
My granddaughter is graduating.
she couldn't get rid of it.
What was she doing? You know, this is an issue. Because to sing opera is just different from the I agree. She's a great Dietrich Fischer-Liska. He did opera. It wasn't to my ear as what he sang. As you say, the guy who did this wall, my sword, he's great. He's a very good piece. Almost impossible. Where was he? Nixon's, yes, I know. It's a beautiful place. Yes, it is. Yeah, the issue I have, hello, isn't voices about the young kid because the his voice is extraordinary.
Yes, yes.
We thought it was wonderful. All in all, his voice was wonderful.
You like the Otello's voice.
I mean, it was healthy, and then you need that big voice, but, to look at it, it's ridiculous.
Yeah, made it hard for me to suspend disbelief.
I found that, that one was even worse.
The Desdemona. I did too. I did too.
I thought about at the end of the opera, that you would need lamps rather than a dagger.
And when he falls on top of her, I thought, oh my God, what's going to happen to this guy?
Hit her on the side.
Yeah, good morning.
Good morning, I did the homework.
Good.
I hope I'm not the only one.
Oh, no, you are not. You are not. Very good. Very good. Excellent. Very good. Thank you. Is this from you?
Yeah.
Thanks so much.
I did it because these parents, actually, except for the encore, all of them are women.
How nice. And are you listening at all to the Third Symphony?
Yes.
Louis Fair.
I thought that was fantastic.
I do too. I've been listening to it again. Hey, could I ask you to help me here? Can you pass some of these things out to people? I appreciate it. Thanks a lot. I'll take care of that table over there. Good morning, everybody. Shabbat Shalom. You loved the opera? You loved it? Otello.
No, I know. I have a lot to talk about.
Good. Me too. Good. Okay, Shabbat Shalom to everybody. Looks like our numbers are growing a little bit. That's great. Welcome to those who are live streaming. Of course, we love to have you on live streaming, whatever is best for you, but there is something very nice about the energy in the room as our numbers grow a little bit. Okay, so let's see here. Let me, just an announcement or two. So tomorrow, Sunday morning, we are going to do again what we've done over the years, and that is meet with the members of Fairmont Temple, those who are going to come to the cemetery, to the Mayfield Cemetery. This is Memorial Day weekend, and on Sunday morning every year we gather, have a brief service, which Rabbi Caruso and I are going to conduct, and then there'll be flags for everybody to walk the cemetery and place a flag on the grave of a veteran. Maybe there are veterans that you know or that you are related to, or you just want to walk the cemetery and place a flag on any grave. I've done this for many, many years. It's a very powerful couple of hours. As you know, the Mayfield Cemetery is a beautiful cemetery, very peaceful. We go there often, well, not often, but walk it. There's the cemetery next door, Lakeview, which is equally beautiful. So these are rich places. So tomorrow morning, 9:15 for the brief service, and then people can do what they want to do. Walk for 20 minutes or walk for 2 hours. That's everybody on his or her own. So I hope that some of you here and some of you are live streaming will do that. Okay. Blessing for the study of Torah. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, asher kidshanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu la'asok b'divrei Torah. We praise you, Lord, our God, sovereign of the universe, who sanctifies us through God's commandments, and joining upon us the obligation to immerse ourselves in words of Torah. Amen. Okay, we're dealing now with the fourth and final question that Immanuel Kant poses to us, and that is, what can we know? And last week I talked about various issues in this question, and I think one of the things, at least to me, we ended up with was that, I'm not sure I used these terms last week, but I've been thinking about it and trying to refine my thinking on it, is that there are two phenomena, I might say, in the biblical literature in this regard. There is the issue of the correspondence between elements of the biblical text and the reality outside the text. And that would be issues of events. Did King David, as reported by the Bible, actually, outside the Bible, do these things? Did Abraham really respond to what he thought God had asked him to do? Was there an Abraham? And did Abraham do what the text said Abraham did? Forget the question. No, let's not forget it. A subset of this is, is there a God outside the text? There's certainly a God inside the text. The Bible has no doubt that there is a God. The question is there? And not only did Abraham do what the text said Abraham did, but is there a God who told Abraham to go to the land that I will show you? So that's the issue of the correspondence between events narrated and events in the objective world. And what I said about that, and perhaps overly hastily, but so far I don't think so, is that we can't answer that question. We can't know. We could know if there were extra textual evidence, like the evidence of archaeology, or of the comparison of different languages. And archaeology, as I've suggested, has shown that there were migrations during the 18th century before the Common Era, and Abraham, according to biblical chronology, lived during that period. Okay, that gets us closer to the Abraham outside the text. But does it? How close does it get us? Migration movements don't mean a particular person migrated. Even if we dug up a shard that had Avraham on it, we wouldn't know that that was the Abraham of the Bible. And even if we got closer to the Abraham of the Bible, we couldn't know that Abraham's part in this migration had anything to do with the call from God. So I think we have to be at least agnostic about the referent made by the reference. The Bible refers to Abraham, and that which is referred to we'll call a referent. And we can't get closer to the referent. Okay? So the issue of correspondence, I think, in terms of what we can know, leaves us agnostic. at best. Skeptical, nihilistic about it at worst. No, of course not. Would be an extreme. That we can't know that either. Then I opened up the possibility of what I'm calling coherence. And the issue of coherence has to do with the relationships among the elements in a text for which we might discover coherence, meaning intra-textual coherence, which doesn't depend at all on whether or not there's a referent in the objective world. Let's call it a story. Let's call it an epic. We know the power of epics in creating meaning and traditions. And they give power to communities. And so another way of looking at the question, what can I know, is whether or not the elements inside the text hang together and create a powerful sense of meaning of our lives. Let me restate that. A powerful sense of the meaning of our lives. The problem with stories is there's not just one of them. If we could discover the God who called Abraham, that would be pretty definitive. But that a story has power doesn't mean, by definition, that it's the only possible story. There never can be one story. Think of Virgil's reconstruction of some of the elements of Homer's epics. That's what Virgil set out to do. I sing of arms and the man. That right there shows us that Virgil is referring both to the Iliad and the Odyssey. I sing of arms. The Iliad's about war. And the man. That's about the Odyssey. That's about Odysseus. So this is clearly an attempt to draw on the prestige and the power of the Homeric epics, but also to revise it. Homer, for example, is deeply egalitarian about those who populate Hades, the afterlife. He doesn't have sinners and saints. Virgil does. So we have the stories of Homer, but they can't ever have been the only stories. Witness what Virgil did. Tried to, I might say, improve them. Certainly James Joyce's Ulysses, published 100 years ago this year, is an attempt to correct what he thinks some of the mistakes of the Odyssey are. Just take, for example, what Leopold Bloom does when he comes home at the end of the book and sees the outlines of Blazes Boylan, the paramour of Molly, his wife, on the bed. What does Odysseus do when he comes home? He kills the suitors. After all, Ulysses, Joyce's Ulysses, is mapped onto the events of the Odyssey. So clearly, Joyce's creation is subject to comparison. He makes it himself. What does Bloom do at the moment that Odysseus in the Odyssey comes home and sees suitors who are pursuing Penelope, his wife? Odysseus kills them. Bloom says, essentially, oh well, this is life. It doesn't have to stop our relationship or our marriage. Life is flawed. Heroes don't necessarily act in the epic way that Odysseus does. And he has this amazing list of things that could be worse, right? 20 things that could be worse. So he gets into bed with Molly. So not only are there, by definition, a multiple of stories, but subsequent stories are often attempts to correct or improve upon their predecessor story. You know, just to go on with this a little bit, there are at least two ways of looking at a literary tradition. Harold Bloom talks about this. Now, there's the Catholic approach, small c, and the Protestant approach, small c. The Catholic approach is that each new piece of literature fits into the universe of the literature of its tradition, creating a broader, more expansive, deeper universe. We might call this a synthetic view of a literary tradition. Each book adds itself or poem to the whole. That's pacific and placid. There's a Protestant view. Think of the word Protestant, protest. I mean, once the Protestant Reformation happened, anybody who knew what was coming would have known there can't be just one version of Protestantism, because Protestantism is based on protest. A Protestant view of a literary tradition is competition, that each subsequent author is trying to find his or her place among the giants who are so formidable that what Bloom calls the belatedness of any particular moment. Wordsworth came too late. Milton already got there. So if Wordsworth is going to win his place in the Pantheon, he's got to overcome in competition Milton. This is a kind of Oedipal view of the literary tradition, right? The contest between the fathers and the sons are trying to make their place. So when we talk about a particular story, we recognize that stories beget stories. And those subsequent stories can either add on to the insights of the previous story or seek to overcome them, or at least to criticize them. But one thing we know about stories, because we're now talking about a coherence view of meaning, is that every story has to recognize that there are other stories. So that's the weakness of the coherence theory of meaning. The strength of the correspondence theory is once you've got a correspondent. How great a pitcher was Warren Spahn? Let's go look at the record. See what he did. He happened to win more games than any lefty in history. 363, I think. Something like that. Very good, very good. And by the way, Sandy Koufax is not the winningest Jewish pitcher in history. Kenny Holtzman is. I'm going to quote Rabbi Casey Stengel. You could look it up. Who had the most wins? You could look it up. And once you do, it's definitive. The greatest pitcher in terms of wins of all time is, Cy Young, I guess. But in terms of stories, you can't get that definitiveness. So my suggestion is and let's go on with it a little bit. In terms of coherence, we're also dealing with two different subject matters. One is the facts and the dates. We know the facts and the dates can't be verified by the data, but we can bring them into a view of coherence of the text. Did David actually banish Michal? We don't know. We don't know any of it. But does that fact in the text, that's why I put quotes around it, add to the meaning of the text. And in that sense, we can take the facts seriously. And I'm using now facts in quotes with the issue of, does the word facts in quotes correspond to the word fact without quotes, outside the text? We only have facts in quotes in the text, but they can add to the power and the meaning of the text, as well as issues, not just facts and data, but issues. We're going to look at the question this morning of the issue of human nature in the text. And we'll look at a variety of texts which talk about what does it mean to be human, and ask ourselves, given Kant's question, does this contribute to our knowledge of human nature? And that's up for grabs. We could say about a writer of fiction, I think one of the premises of this whole thing for me is that the Bible is a supreme fiction. That just as fiction oftentimes tells us truths that the facts of the world don't get to, so fictions might tell us truths about the way things are. To me, the fact that the Bible is a fiction doesn't detract from its power and meaning, although it becomes one of many ways of guiding the lived life. So, in a coherence theory of meaning, every part of it, the fact, so to speak, in quotes, as well as the issues that are raised, now become valid subject matter for what can I know. Okay, so I think actually that's where we are. So I'm suggesting here that when Kant began to think about what can I know, he was really one of many philosophers who are trying to justify science. Can science really tell us about the natural world? And logical positivism in the 20th century, the Vienna Circle, Wittgenstein, the early Wittgenstein, was just trying to make sense out of the scientific endeavor. And Wittgenstein later turned to an ordinary language theory of meaning in which not just scientific terms are meaningful, but all kinds of things become meaningful if I'm just looking at the way we talk. So that we're not interested, see, the thing about Kant is that he was interested in the correspondence between what happens in the mind and what happens in the world. Can I get out there? And Kant's view is yes and no. I can get out there, but I can't talk about metaphysical issues anymore. What is the soul? What is God? What is immortality? Those become nonsense in terms of verifiability. But we can get over to the facts of the matter, Kant said, in a very complicated endeavor. So our attempt to answer Kant's question is not Kantian. It doesn't have as its goal Immanuel Kant's goal, but the question is still relevant, but now in its own terms, because we're not trying to verify the connection between the text and the objective world, but what is happening within the covers of the text. And at trying to answer the question, is there knowledge there? If we asked, is there belief there, that's a very uninteresting question, I might say philosophically. The answer is yes. The Bible is asking us to believe certain things, and an array of mutually contradictory things. Is there justice in the world? Deuteronomy says, of course there's justice in the world. The book of Job says, well, that's a big problem. And the friends of Job come to defend Deuteronomy. Yes, there's justice. You must have done something wrong. You had to have done something wrong. Because if the world is just, nobody's punished gratuitously. You're always punished for what you did. Moral coherence. Job says, no, I don't think so. I don't think I did anything that bad. As a matter of fact, I did a lot of wonderful things. At the end of the book, whose position does God support? The God of Deuteronomy supports the friends. The God of the book of Job supports Job. You were heroic. I'm giving you all the stuff back. So the meaning, the coherence of the biblical text is complicated. And I think we cannot get one univocal, one voice view of what the Torah means. Because the Torah, I think, is a dialectical text. There's the no against the yes, also in the text. Gary?
So let me go back to your statement, which is a very strong statement, that the Bible is a fiction.
Yes.
Very strong statement.
Yeah.
So do you mean by that the Bible is only a series of fables?
So I've been asked by people on a live stream to repeat the questions. I get so caught up in the conversation I forget to. So Gary is now asking about my claim, which I can't remember exactly what you called it, but let me say extreme. Strong. Do I really mean the Bible is a fiction? And here's my answer to this question. I entertain it as a hypothesis. It's an extremely attractive hypothesis to me. As a matter of fact, I think the hypothesis, among its many benefits, is that it fits a pluralistic social and political environment. If I thought the Bible were true in a correspondence way, then I would be committed more and more to a one perspective view of how to live our lives. Let's take the whole what scholars call the Christ event in Christianity. The Christ event is the series of crucial moments in the life of Jesus: incarnation, crucifixion, resurrection, with a lot of miracles in between. What's the status of the incarnation? That God, the infinite, became man, finite. And that Jesus is the answer to the dilemma that the Old Testament doesn't solve. How can I be justified before God? How can I finally restore a powerful, positive relationship with God? The Bible recognizes that we're sinners and that we're trying to do our best. And God hangs in there when people go astray, and Moses comes to give us laws, and the prophets then come to reinforce the laws in bad times. And when do we finally get it right? Never. The Christian view here, it's always hazardous for somebody who's a non-X to say what X is. So I do this with a little trepidation, and I apologize for not knowing what I'm talking about from the inside. And I think that's an important qualification. So Jesus is made, this is my son with whom I am well pleased. John 3:14, you often see that on placards in public events, right? John 3:14, God so loved the world that he gave his only begotten Son so that we may be saved and redeemed. True or false? Well, there are two ways of understanding that. Is it a powerful part of the story? Yes. Who could deny yes? Did it actually happen outside the story? Well, a coherence theory of meaning leaves something out. Do I now have the resources to be redeemed, to gain justification? The Christian view, at least one of them, is not by myself. I need help. I always use the image of a deep, dark tunnel. And let's think of the Jewish view and the Christian view. Notice how silly this is. I mean, in one sense, the Jewish view and the Christian view. What do Jews believe about life after death? There are two possible ways of answer. Three. One, yes. The other, no. The other, both. So these questions don't admit of simple answers, but I'm going to give one anyway. We human beings are, in a way, down a deep, dark pit. God says at the beginning, after the Noah story, I know that human beings are evil from their youth. That's us, isn't it? What are the resources for getting out of the deep, dark pit? The Jewish view is we have them ourselves. God created a coherent universe. We have minds with which to think. We're given commandments for how to live a life, and we're given a text that helps us to navigate it, and we can do it. Have we done it yet? No. Can we do it? Yes. So in other words, in the pit is a ladder from the start. If only we would climb it and get ourselves out of it. And I think the Jewish tradition never gives up on that. The Christian view is, yes, we're down a deep, dark pit, but there ain't no ladder. It'll take another divine act to get us out of the pit. And that divine act was sending Jesus, the Messiah, to, being innocent, suffer for our sakes, die on the cross, and that act is the way out of the pit. If you believe in Jesus the Christ, you will be redeemed. Well, did it happen? If the answer is yes, all of us Jews are misguided. There's a way out of the pit. It's an easy way, I might say. Just believe. Now, St. Paul, by the way, resists that answer. You know, St. Paul travels around the Eastern Mediterranean. He founds churches, and then he goes to the next stop, and he hears that the people in Galatia and Ephesus have misunderstood what he had in mind. And one of the things they misunderstood was the preaching that because Jesus has died for our sins, we're no longer subject to sin. And therefore we can do what we want. This is called Antinomianism, nomos law. Antinomianism is that the law doesn't help us. It's faith that helps us. For Paul, the law has fundamentally two options. It binds us, it puts us in a kind of prison, and because we can't accomplish it fully, the very law itself shows us the inadequacy of the law. And if I acknowledge the inadequacy of the law, I recognize the need for something else. So, The cleverness of the God of the Old Testament is to show us the inadequacy of Old Testament religion, from which we infer we need a New Testament religion. But the question is, did it happen? Of course it happened, according to a correspondence theory of the text. And look, could a Christian accept merely a coherence theory of meaning? Christ is just a character in a story. And he did something really dramatic, like Sidney Carton in The Tale of Two Cities. Wow. Was there ever a Sidney Carton? Who cares? Of course the answer is no. The story of The Tale of Two Cities has enormous power. Is the incarnation, is the crucifixion, is the resurrection like that? I think Christianity falls to the ground if you, gosh, I'm making big statements here. But I'm not sure that Judaism falls to the ground if you think of it as a fiction. Maybe I'm wrong about that. Honor thy father and mother. Nice try. No, God never said that. Some author, some fiction writer said that. And, if I don't like The Tale of Two Cities, I'll read the Brothers Karamazov. I mean, the Bible just becomes another story. That's the danger of the fiction view. The power, I think, is that we can find coherence and meaning in our story without denying the power and meaning of other stories for other people. And that, I think, it's a big gain. But in a way, it's an epistemological quagmire, isn't it? Because now we're knowing with a small k and not a capital K. But isn't that enough? Kierkegaard talks about subjective certainty as opposed to objective certainty. That's what I feel. That's what I feel. I don't know for sure that the events of the Bible have objective truth to them, but subjectively they form the basis of the way I live my life. Isn't that enough? So that's the power of fiction. And when you think about the great works of fiction, I mean, was there ever an Achilles? Did Priam really come to Achilles' tent and beg for the body of his son? I'm going to say no. So when we read that passage, do we not weep? I mean, that's a story about our lives, right? Priam comes, this great king, and has to abase himself in front of Achilles. And then they weep over their relatives. Priam says to Achilles, I'm weeping for my son. Your father is weeping for you. Because when Achilles had the option of leaving the Trojan War and leading continuing to live into old age, even though he's going to spend most of his evenings watching TV, as opposed to knowing he's going to die in battle as a hero whose life is filled with meaning and power in the few years that he has left. And Achilles says, no, I can't, I'm not interested in soap operas. What I want is this one. And so his father knows he's going to die. So Priam, the great king of Troy, and Achilles' father are in the same position. It's a universal position, parents and their children. And when they weep together, Achilles says to Priam after a few minutes, let's not take this too far. I am still deeply angry with you and the Trojans for what they did to Patroclus. So that there's power and pathos, but Achilles is remaining himself, just as we have a 2-3-foldness inside of us. Compassion and the desire to get back at somebody who has hurt us. So, that never happened. Am I right? Homer made that up. Was there ever a Trojan War? I mean, scholars, archaeologists, a couple of generations ago, thought they found evidence for it in a layer under the earth, which they dated to that period, say 1100 before the Common Era, in which there's evidence of a great fire. Trojan War. No, just a great fire. I mean, archaeologists tried to show that Noah's flood was real with the same sort of thing. They saw evidence around that time. You know, archaeology deals with the transference of space into time. The deeper you go, the further back in time you go. So archaeology can give us some access to events that happened millennia ago. The only problem is we don't know what it means. You found a little something somewhere in the ancient world of a big flood. Is that Noah's flood? Yes. But another archaeologist showed that flood area was limited, and it didn't really encompass the world as Noah's flood story does. So I'm going to say that fiction, though it rubs against us in some ways, is the way I see it as a powerful hypothesis to me. Though I'm not sure that as I continue to think about it, that I'll continue to strengthen the hypothesis. I might come to grief over it. I mean, I think a Christian who wants that is not. The New Testament has the curtains of the temple tear at the moment of the crucifixion. That's a claim of objectivity. That's a claim that something actually did happen. You know, God forbid if I should die tomorrow, nothing's going to happen to the temple. You know, the chairs become stained. Oh, that death is really significant. That's not going to happen. So, but you know, the problem with the hypothesis is, as I've been saying, that now we can't really, in a way we're sort of insular within our stories. Although we try to live our lives, and so that's something of corroboration of the power of stories if we live lives of meaning and quality. Don't you think? In other words, yeah, this is an interesting point. I can't know whether the facts build the story, but I can know that the story builds the facts. How, if I live my story, I can have an impact. And if I buy the notion of compassion and am compassionate to people, care about them, and if somebody says, where'd you get that from? And I say, well, from my parents, from my tradition, from my books, from my Torah. That links back to the objective world again. The building up doesn't come from the world, but the building back does. Something like that. Harry.
Doesn't this go back to what is the purpose of the Bible in the first place?
Yes.
To me, the Bible was written thousands of years ago by people much like ourselves, because human nature hasn't changed all that much. Why was it written? I think two purposes. One is to describe the human condition and the other is to give lessons, to give regulations on how we should behave. In illustrating the need and validity of those lessons, it sometimes becomes necessary to invoke certain stories, not all of which may be true, to illustrate the point and make these lessons more understandable and meaningful for the listeners, if you will.
That's an extremely elegant presentation of a point of view. I really love what you said, Harry, and I'm going to try to reiterate it for those who are live streaming. So I think you made three fundamental points and a lot of important subpoints in my distillation. Two of them are about the power of, say, the Bible. It describes in profound ways human nature. And it also gives prescriptions and proscriptions about what we ought to do and not do. And you went on to say that if it needs clarification, we can find different ways of clarifying it. So far, do I have it? The third thing you said, which was the first thing, is something I'm going to challenge. That the authors of that text were people just like us. John Keats was just like us, except he did something that none of us, pardon me if I'm generalizing here, could do. Deathless poetry, filled with emotion, filled with reference, metaphor. Keats tells us something about what it means to be human. Homer's just another Greek, just like us. Beethoven. No. We can't. He did some of the stuff we do, but they gave us something deathless. Look, I give a Devar Torah pretty much every other week. What's the half-life of the power of a Devar Torah? So I gave one a couple of weeks ago, and several people commented on it. Last night somebody commented on it, 2 weeks later. In another month, nobody is going to comment on it. Nobody's going to anthologize it. Nobody's going to read it 100 years from now. I am not like the author of the biblical text, or Beethoven, or Shakespeare, except in the most pedestrian ways. Of course they walked the earth and did what I do and you do. So I think that's the crux of it, Harry, that the authors, I'm agreeing with you that these are human artifacts made by human beings. But only a small group of that sort of stuff done by human beings has eternality written on it, because it gives us a powerful and profound vision, not but a vision of how to live. And in that sense, it becomes true, small t, coherent, powerful. Don't you think, Harry, that that's true? They're not like us.
Well, even today, there are certain people that are smart, capable in certain fields that will be remembered many years from now. This is true of every generation. So, of course, not every one of us, but certain knowledgeable people create a knowledgeable segment of the population.
Right.
The Bible.
Right, and Harry just said, in every generation we have this, and in every discipline we have it. And that is an illustration of one of the powers of calling it fiction, pluralism. There are always going to be more insights in whatever field. Isaac Newton reigned supreme for 3 centuries until a guy named Einstein came along and showed not that Newton was wrong, but that Newton's vision had limited applicability. Newtonian physics doesn't deal with the subatomic world. That's quantum mechanics. Nor the superatomic world. Universal, well, he does deal with universal gravitation, but he doesn't at all reckon with the possibility that space itself can be affected by matter. Newton thought of space as a receptacle. When I put the fruit in a bowl, I don't change the bowl. For Einstein, the bowl is changed by gravity. So Newton doesn't cease to be one of the astonishing minds in history, but another mind came along. And there's Niels Bohr and so on. So you're absolutely right, but so what? I'm challenged by fictions. Other fictions challenge Nietzsche. Challenges the assumptions of, let's call it, Western religion and metaphysics. That was Nietzsche's goal, to undermine what he called the double-decker universe, the arena of our lives, and the metaphysical world, the Platonic other world. And Nietzsche said his basic goal was to destroy Western metaphysics. And Nietzsche, characteristically said, I do philosophy with a hammer. I break things. Well, what about Nietzsche? Nietzsche is challenging my story. And I have to reckon with it. No, I don't have to. I could ignore it. But this is the thing about the great philosophers. They give us big stories. And we have to ask ourselves, can I live in this story? And if the answer is no, I still have to reckon with its power. That's my argument for fiction. There are many fictions. Alan?
Last week you asked us what we thought the Bible was about.
Yes.
You mentioned before this discussion the word caring. And to my mind, that's what the Bible is about. You have to care for yourself, you have to care for the land, you have to care for the animals, you have to care for other people. And the other thing that our Bible talks about is that as Jews, we are obligated to promulgate that premise that we should be caring. Using that last premise, I would ask the people here, those inclined, who would reach out to the parents of the kids who were killed in Uvalde, to the two teachers, and to those again who are inclined to do whatever they thought reasonable to try to prevent this event from happening again.
So you have drawn a contemporary, so Alan's point was, if the Bible's fundamental message is to care for others, and that's a nice hypothesis, isn't it? If that's what it comes down to, and maybe that's one story about the story. I mean, there is this notion of the Torah within the Torah. What of everything there is between those two covers is going to be the essence of what we get from it. And of course, just as there are many stories, there are many Torahs within the Torah. And Alan's Torah within the Torah, so to speak, focuses on caring. And then you've done something really, I think, powerful. You've said this isn't just a story. This is an imperative.
You can do it.
And it's an imperative for our day. I love it. I love it. I mean, I know I know your point, Alan, wasn't so that we would love it, but that we would do it. That we would do it. Well, that's very good, though. I mean, that's seeing the ongoing power of the story. By the way, I did ask people to put on this podium some ideas about what the essence of the Bible is, and I think 4 people turned things in, and that is great. Some of you said, here's my homework. I didn't mean it as homework, and if you didn't do it, so what? I mean, but thanks for those who did do it. I'm going to look at them pretty carefully. Good. Isn't it nice to embrace a hypothesis about something that's crucial? Because when you have a hypothesis in your head, it works on you, doesn't it? And you gain, even by pondering, you gain further insight, either in support or against. I mean, there's evidence against my hypothesis, I imagine. Malcolm, you had a question.
Maybe 2 different things.
Yeah.
Relative to Harry's comment and the fiction in the Bible, I guess I'd suggest that a fiction's power is based on its coherence and its adherence.
And it's,
Adherence.
what do you mean by adherence?
How much of humanity adheres to that story.
Oh, that's interesting. In other words, you're
So
talking,
I think that, and I like this notion of thinking of the Bible as a fiction. In part because I think it challenges me, as opposed to just accepting it as rote. But to me, I have to allow that 3,000 years from now, another fiction may have similar or greater power because of its coherence and the adherence to it. And that's not a problem, but I think it supports the argument that Harry was making.
namely, Harry was making the point that there are many.
He said it's a book written by people very much like us.
Yeah.
And I take your point, well, but not very many of us.
Yes.
Okay, but someone or someones could create or have created a book which have not lived long enough to be tested.
Look, I love your notion of adherence. If I analyze the power or the truth, small t, of a text, I can judge it, I think I mentioned this last week, on 3 different grounds, the 3 different verb tenses, past, present, future. I can offer demonstration for a true text by from whence it came. If it came from God, that's the power of God wrote it. That tells us that this is a text to be reckoned with, if not the text. I can look at the text itself. In other words, I can think of the connection between the past and the text. From the past comes the divine word. I can look at the text itself, and through reading it and analyzing it, feeling it over a period of time, I come to feel, and we come to feel, that this text has inherent power. From whatever source it came, I don't care. To what it leads, I don't care. Because the text itself demonstrates its power. Hamlet, just take anything. Aristotle's metaphysics, power. There's also the question of adherence. How many people buy into it? And that's a piece of evidence too, isn't it? And your point is, over time, how many people? And by definition, it can always be supplanted by another text. Here's a good example from history. The New Testament. The New Testament supplanted the Old Testament for hundreds of millions of people. The Old Testament became a prologue to the New Testament. That's why the Old Testament is important, because it leads to the New Testament. The Quran, in Muslim traditions which knew the Old Testament and the New Testament, I mean, we have similar stories in the Quran, but often with significant variation, which makes us wonder, are they fiddling with the text to fit their own view, or do they have an alternate text? But nevertheless, there have been examples in history of a subsequent text supplanting a prior text. That's, by the way, why the rabbis said that there is an end to prophecy. Around the year 500, before the Common Era, according to the rabbis, prophecy ceased. That's one of the reasons why the wisdom of Ben Sira didn't make it into the Bible, because it's clear that Ben Sira was written long after the end of prophecy. And if prophecy is over, then nothing that's subsequent can get into the Bible. Here's the question. Is it true that prophecy ceased? Well, how do I know? But why did the rabbis say so? Because they recognize the power of your concern. Once you open the spigot of prophecy, you can't just gratuitously turn it off. If prophecy happened once, it can happen again. What, God cannot do prophecy again? So the rabbis are doing this precisely because of the problem of supersession. We want to make it improbable that another text can supplant our text, because they knew not only was it possible, but it was happening. Bill?
Going to Malcolm and
Here.
thoughts. Adherence is probably the most important thing as to, how we say, acceptance, usage. But what happens with the adherence is the nature of the adherence. And so therefore, human nature, being as it is,
Yes.
there becomes this separation between temporal pleasures and spiritual life.
That's
and
what
the usage of the knowledge of the Bible, as was mentioned about caring, becomes how you use it. So it's not only adherence, it's also usage within the adherence. And a beautiful world if we all accepted the message of the Bible in both parts of our lives. I mean, but there are those of us who believe that AK-47s are in our Constitution and part of our spiritual life. I mean, you can argue that till you're blue in the face. But I think the necessity, the parts that we're talking about is that we're taking a unit and we're trying to and seeing how far it can be expanded. And I think, like you said, the rabbis are trying to curtail it. But even those who accept the Bible also accept its continual, how can I best say this, usage and reinterpretation. I mean, the whole.
Yeah. So Bill is,
Catholic.
no, not at all. So Bill is now challenging the adequacy of the criterion of adherence without subtleties. Because there are certain kinds of adherence, right? It can be used for a variety of purposes. So not only do we have the interpretation of the text, but we have the interpretation of the interpretation. It reminds me of something that happened in the history of 19th century utilitarianism. You know, the founder of utilitarianism was Jeremy Bentham. And he thought, you know, one of the ways of solving the problem of obligation is to quantify it. Now it's not up for subjective assessment. So the greatest good for the greatest number. The more people who are benefited get pleasure out of something, the more the obligation grows. John Stuart Mill, who was in that tradition, said, you know what, it's not just a matter of quantity, it's a matter of quality. That's essentially your point. It's not just how many adhere, but what's the nature of the adherence. Here looms the quagmire, right? You know, Mill was right. But the problem with Mill's view, Mill said it's better to be Socrates dissatisfied than a pig satisfied. It's the quality of the pleasure. Socrates didn't have any pleasure in the television sense, but he had the deep pleasure of pursuing the truth, even though he was strung up for it. The pig's pleasure is enormous and unending, but would you rather be Socrates dissatisfied than a pig satisfied? Of course. So it's the quality of pleasure. Unless you like Bertrand Russell's response to Mill's claim, did you ever ask the pig? Whose pleasure is being assessed here? So, Bill, I mean, you've got a very good point here, and I think it illustrates the general idea that I'm promoting. There's no objective way of measuring the quality of one's adherence. And I think the only proof, and maybe this is, Alan, part of your point, is what does it lead to? If caring is fundamental to the Bible, then we'd better darn well devote ourselves to caring. How? Well, I can give you a list. But what would that mean? You have your own list. But it's not just a matter of a book, it's a book that calls to us. The Bible is a book about vocation. To what are we called? That's the New Testament, that's the Quran, isn't it? Isn't it? I take it Keats isn't talking about our vocation, is he? I don't know. Well, I have to think about that. Vivian.
Oh, well, this is another question that is bubbled up to me in discussing the immortality of fiction. But if you go back to the immortality of sacred text,
Yes.
then I want to deep further down from story to words. Whose language is older? Where do these stories and in what words have they bubbled up? I feel I want a timeline there between Hinduism and Buddhism and Judaism, Christianity, when we started printing the Bible. I think the words also play into how we have adhered to our sacred text.
Okay.
I know I'm being very obtuse here, but
Oh, no, not at all.
This could be a fascinating. I mean, I'm sure it's a course of study.
So Vivian is interested in the issue of the words and the origin of the words and the timeline of subsequent words.
When was the Bible actually written?
Yeah.
In what?
Yeah.
Aramaic, Hebrew.
Okay.
Where are the and I'm confused.
Oh, you're really looking for an answer aside of just posing the question.
I'm raising something that is.
Right.
Well, I mean, I love this discussion, and I'm buying into all of it, actual language we are using.
Good.
And how we can share those expressions and those stories.
Okay, so Vivian has introduced into our conversation something we haven't even begun to introduce into this discussion, and that's the issue of time.
Yes.
And here's my response, two parts. Inherently fascinating. Let's do it. Let's get the history. Let's find out when it was written, the way it was written, who edited it, how did it get together, and so on. How was it transmitted, and so on. Oh my.
That's like archaeology in Lexa.
And the study of language. Let's do it. You know, Frank Cross, what do you call these guys? Epigraphers, was able to map the history of the development of ancient Hebrew. And given the slant and the shape of letters, he was able to array certain texts along a timeline. That's from scrolls. Here's my on 1 foot response. Let's suppose that for the first time ever, Ben Jonson's poem, On My First Son, appeared. It appeared under the floor, and I dug it, and for the first time, we have it. So the historical question is easily answered. When did it appear? And I could also ask, from evidence, maybe I know a little more about Ben Jonson and so on and so on, when it was written. Does that make a whit of difference to our question? In other words, do I need to know when Ben Jonson's poem was written to know its power and to think about its elegance and analyze it, the metaphors and the rhyme scheme and all of the things by which we try to understand a piece of poetry? Because we're talking about meaning, and I think meaning doesn't have anything to do with, let's suppose that Ecclesiastes was not in the Bible, but that one fine day Ecclesiastes was discovered. Would anybody think of putting it in the Bible? I say no. It's a book. It's a skeptical book, probably made in the Bible because of the last 2 verses which were tacked on to save it. In other words, meaning has nothing to do with history. I know that's wrong, but something like that. So I think what you're asking is extremely relevant and interesting, but it doesn't have to do, I think, with the meaning of the text and what the text has meant. So here's what let's do. Let's put this topic aside. You had a question, didn't you, Stuart?
Well, it was related to the question that she raised. The Bible was legend, not fact, written down centuries after the events it describes. So, and in a language that is totally different.
Not totally, but yes.
It's very different.
The alphabet, for sure.
Yeah, well, the whole spoken language and written language were different.
Okay.
I think that is relevant.
To the history of the text. I mean, in other words, I think your point might be, tell me if I'm right, Stuart is supporting Vivian's claim that historical questions are relevant. In what sense, though? In other words, let's suppose that the Leviticus was, the Bible indicates quite clearly that it's promulgated by Moses, who did the 5 books of Moses, and there's Leviticus right in the center. Modern scholarship suggests, I think this is being questioned now, that it was written in the exile by a priestly class after the demise of kings and prophets. If they're going to sustain the coherence of a community, they need a new form of leadership. And it becomes a kind of theocracy. And in the exile, they write the book of Leviticus. So the exile is the 6th century, and Moses is the 13th or the 12th century.
Maybe it was written down as a collection of stories that had existed for a century.
The oral tradition.
Yeah.
Sure. What's the relevance of that to the question of meaning?
As the question of meaning, it has no relationship, or little relationship.
As a hypothesis, no relationship, I'm sure it could be challenged. But it has meaning outside this question. That's what you and Vivian are saying. We'd like to know.
Yeah.
Right. When Deuteronomy says wipe out the Canaanites, who's this? Israel Finkelstein, the current contemporary archaeologist, said no, this was not written at the time of Moses, written at the time of Josiah, when real enemies existed, and he's just post-dicting, what's the way to say it? Retro-dicting back into history.
Ruth tells a totally different story.
Exactly. I think that the question, the historical questions, philological questions are very interesting. I could ask the question, what did Lou Gehrig have for lunch when he hit his last of 185 RBIs one year? I might be interested in that, but does that have any relevance? Now, with Wade Boggs, of course, it is important, as we all know, because Wade Boggs always insisted on eating chicken before a game. So the history of Wade Boggs' success is important. I'm tongue-in-cheek here, tongue-in-cheek. Okay, so what I'd like to do in the minutes that we have, not many, but I want to make a turn to one of the offerings by one of you to the question, what parts of the Bible? So you've given me a lot to think about, but Irv Kushner sent me earlier in the week what you now have in the handout as an attempt to understand the Bible's contribution to one question. What does it mean to be human? And by the way, just some... If you send me something, I feel it's in the public domain and I can use it. But I wouldn't put your name to it in public unless I got your permission to do so. So I don't want anybody to worry, my gosh, if I give the guy something, maybe he's going to say it's me. If I want it to be you, I'll ask you if I can say your name. And I asked Irv, and Irv said fine. That's why his name is here. So what I'd like to do here is to begin to work our way through what Irv has suggested here. What does it mean to be human at the top? The Bible, a textbook of human nature, what people are really like. And to Irv's list here, which I think is potent, I've added a couple of more passages. Oh, good, all right, yeah, good. I've added a couple of more passages, not that anything is inadequate to what Irv has done, but I want to continue to deepen Irv's point, okay? So also, before we look at some of these passages, I want to read the bottom paragraph, which I have added to another text that email that Irv sent me to give some context to it. So he says, I like these because these examples underscore the challenges that are confronted by the people who structure societies. The ancient Hebrews are an example. So this is a good contextualizing of this in the following way. I'm not sure if this is what you had in mind, but this is how I read it. That these passages give us a very dark view of human nature, But Irv is suggesting that the dark view was seen by the biblical authors or editors as a challenge. In other words, if this gives us a view of the pathologies of human nature, we might ask, what are the antidotes? And does the Bible attempt to offer antidotes? And Irv is suggesting at least the question is taken up by the Bible. Whether or not the antidote, this is my language, is sufficient is something we'll want to think about. And Irv goes on to say, how can we organize things in the face of the perversity of human nature? By the way, perversity of human nature sounds strong. Is it overly strong? I would say that the biblical author would answer no to that question. The biblical author knows who we are and is surgical in displaying it, which I think is one of the glories of the Bible, because it doesn't flinch when it comes to saying, what are human beings capable of doing? How can we organize things in the face of the perversity of human nature so that there is a modicum of tranquility and stability as the purported goal? We've got a perverse human nature. How can we arrive at tranquility and stability? That raises the question of how to do it. Irv offers one possible way of doing it. The God abstraction is one way. I like this very much because I think Irv, I'm not trying to say that in 200 years from now people are going to be reading this paragraph. But I think it's elegant in terms of structuring the issue. What is the Bible's view of X? If X is a deep problem, does the Bible offer an antidote to X? If it offers an antidote to X, what are the possible candidates for the antidote? And Irv speculates about a possible antidote, the God abstraction. I love that. I love it not because I accept all of it, but that I think it's a powerful structuring of our problem, which then lays the groundwork for an interesting discussion about God. What does the God idea or abstraction do to resolve or ameliorate the human condition, which in one way is painted very darkly? That's a great question. It's way beyond the question, do you believe in God? When people ask me that, I want to say, what do you mean? Do I believe in poetry? Who's God? What God? What's the definition? What does God do? And so on. Yeah, is it merely, if I say I believe in God, is it merely the claim that of all the entities in the universe, all of them, if you were to eliminate everything in the material world, would there be a God left over? Is God another entity in the universe? Is that the sum and substance of it? Yes. No. Who cares what the answer to that question is? What kind of God? What's the function of God? And so on. The functional question. So, let's look here. So, at the very top. Now Cain said to his brother Abel, let us go out to the field. While they were in the field, Cain attacked his brother Abel and killed him. The very first act out of the Garden of Eden is murder. It's not only murder, it's fratricide. One person killing a sibling, a brother. What's the Bible trying to tell us here? I mean, the Garden of Eden is a period of timelessness. If Adam and Eve had been clever, they'd have eaten the tree of life before they ate the tree of knowledge. It was there for the taking. Immortality was there. That's the myth of the Garden of Eden. We could have lived forever in paradise. Of course, it wouldn't be a story about our lives, but it would be a lovely story, which I'd take a look at. My mother would read it when I was 5, and I'd never look at it again because it has nothing to do with me. If we live forever, they live forever. What does that have to do with me? So they leave the Eden and enter history. One definition of history is the arena in which we die. Time matters. And what's the first thing that happens? Fratricide. What a grim picture of the human condition that is, isn't it? The second one. Now there was a famine in the land, and Avram went to Egypt to live there for a while because the famine was severe, and he was about to enter Egypt. He said to his wife, Sarah, I know what a beautiful woman you are. When the Egyptians see you, they will say, this is his wife. Then they will kill me and let you live. God forbid. So say you're my sister, so I'll be treated well for your sake. My life will. The plain meaning here is that Sarah becomes a pawn, an instrument in the preservation of Abraham. He sets her up. Say you're my sister. Now you're lying. They may discover the lie. In any event, you're now in Pharaoh's tent, and what's he going to do with you, and so on. So this is human beings' capacity to dehumanize other human beings and to use them for their own ends. I'm not pinning that interpretation on Irv, but I think this passage gives rise to that possibility. Nachmanides, one of the greatest interpreters in history, blames Abraham for this. Abraham sinned. He didn't have enough faith that God would save the day. That's Maimonides' worldview. But in any event, Abraham is not without rebuke in the tradition. So Rebekah said to her son Jacob, look, I overheard your father say to your brother Esau, bring me some game, prepare some tasty food. I may give you my blessing in the presence of the Lord before I die. Now, my son, this is Rebekah, listen carefully, do what I tell you. Go out to the flock, bring 2 choice goats. I can prepare some tasty food, just the way he likes it, and take it to your father. He may give you his blessing before he dies. And Jacob said to his mother, but my brother Esau's a hairy man. I'm a man of, what if my father touches me? In other words, the ruse. Esau gets the blessing because he's the firstborn, and Rebekah tries to subvert the mandate of nature. Nature has a good answer to the question of inheritance. The first in time gets the most. That's a good way of doing it. It's an objective way of doing it. Rebekah has another set of criteria. Who deserves it? This is her view. But my brother and so on, what if my father touches me? I appear to be tricking him, bring down a curse on myself. And his mother said, let the curse fall on me. Do what I say and go get them for me, and so on. Then Rebekah, I'm skipping a little bit, took the best clothes of Esau, her son, which he had in the house, and put them on her younger son, covered his hands, and so on. Then she handed her son Jacob the tasty food and the bread. He went to his father and said, my father, yes, who is it? And Jacob said, I'm Esau, your firstborn. This is the degree to which we are able to conspire against other people in the truth in order to gain what we want to do. The manipulation. Abraham manipulated Sarah. What do we have so far? The murderousness of human beings. The Cain and Abel story is about human beings, isn't it? And our capacity to set up others so that we might get saved. Who? My next door neighbor. No, not just my next door neighbor. The person down the block. No. My own wife. My own children. Against my own husband. Because their sister Dinah had been defiled, Jacob's sons replied deceitfully as they spoke to Shechem and his father Hamor, and they said, we can't do such a thing. We can't give our sister to a man who's not circumcised. That would be a disgrace to us. We'll enter in an agreement with you on one condition, that you become like us by circumcising all your males. In other words, some guy from whatever community it is, Hamor, I can't remember which. He wants to marry Dinah. And no, you can't do it unless you're circumcised. Okay, so they agree. All of them circumcised. Every male in the city was, 3 days later, while all of them were still in pain, Dinah's brothers took their swords and attacked the unsuspecting city, killing every male. So they not only engage in mass murder, but they set the people up. And what's the instrument of the manipulation? A mitzvah. They use one of God's commandments in order to set up an entire people so that while they're convalescing, they can kill them. This is a story about monsters, I might want to say. In what species are the monsters? No, I don't know. I mean, it can't be human beings, can it? This must be a different species who would do this. Wait a minute. It's us. Let me just quickly, let me just add a little something to this. Just a story that's familiar to us. The beginning of the Joseph story, chapter 37. By the way, the Dinah story is in chapter 34, if you want to go back to it. Now, Jacob was settled in the land where his father had sojourned, the land of Canaan. This is the line of Jacob. Now, what's the setup here? Jacob had run away from Esau and lived north for 20 years, and he struggled with Laban. And finally, he married both Leah and Rachel, and Laban tried to keep him from making any gain from these 20 years, and Jacob tricked him back. And then God said to him, go back home. He's on his way home, and he meets Esau of all things, and he thinks Esau's going to kill him. But Esau's a softy. He's forgotten the whole thing. In that sense, Esau's a hero. He let it go. And now Jacob is finally settled. Vayeshev Yaakov. And Yeshiv comes from the Hebrew word shuv, which means not only to sit, but to dwell. He's now dwelling. He's not just there as one step along the way. Things are finally good for Jacob. This is the line of Jacob. At 17 years of age, Joseph tended the flocks with his brothers as a helper to the sons of his father's wives, Bilhah and Zilpah. Joseph brought a bad report of them to their father. Okay, the tattletale. Now, Israel loved Joseph best of all his sons. Parental favoritism. For he was a child of his old age. We know why. He was aged, he's getting real sentimental. But he's also the child of his favorite wife. Okay, so favoritism has two moments to it. The vulnerability of the family to the elements of human nature. I have 2 daughters and a son. I always ask my son to go out and play catch. He made him an ornamental tunic. And when his brothers saw that their father loved him more than any brother, they hated him. So that they could not speak a friendly word to him. Joseph had a dream in which he told his brothers. They hated him even more. He said to them, hear this dream. So he brags. Doesn't Joseph have a sense of how this is going to hurt his brothers? And his brothers said, do you mean to reign over us? Do you mean to rule over us? And they hated him even more for his talk and for his dreams. He dreamed another dream, and so on and so on. Verse 12, it's an extension. One time when his brothers had gone to pasture their flock, Israel said to Joseph, your brothers are pasturing, come, I'll send you to them. Evidently, he doesn't know the story of this conflict between the brothers. He answered, I'm ready. Go see how your brothers, and so on. When he reached Shechem, verse 15, a man came and so on. What are you looking for? Verse 18, they saw him from afar, and before he came close to them, they conspired to kill him. I mean, look at all of the elements of human nature that we see here. Bragging, favoritism, poisonous favoritism, hatred, jealousy. Fratricide raises its ugly head again, killing the brother. I've got stuff from Exodus. The Pharaoh and the Egyptians tried to kill the Israelites. I got Deuteronomy chapter 20. Take a look at it. When you start conquering the land, kill everybody. If you're conquering a people that's far away from you, you can offer them peace and not kill them on the condition that they serve you. But if the peoples live contiguously with your boundaries, kill them. Man, woman, and child. Excuse me?
Sounds very familiar with what's going on today.
Well, look, I mean, yeah, that it goes on perennially, I think is part of what we might call the power of the Bible's view. So, one element of biblical religion, if we're talking about meaning, do we care any longer at this particular moment that whether or not there was a Joseph, whether there was a Jacob, a Cain, or an Abel? I mean, not me. I mean, if I read an article, discovery of the bones of Cain. Archaeologist says he found Abel's skeleton. I am not reading that piece. I don't care. Unless I'm in my Vivian mood, where I want to know something else about history or the work of archaeology. But in terms of the meat, if it were Roger Angell, yeah, oh my God. Roger Angell. Do you know Roger Angell is one of the greatest literary stylists of American history, who wrote amazing stuff on the Bible. The Bible. Well, okay, the Bible. That was a slip. Roger Angell is a guy worth reading. What does he say? Derek Jeter is an imperturbable genius. I mean, who writes like this? So Roger Angell. Yeah. So, okay. So, look, I think the question remains for us. What about the subset of passages which we could expand? Couldn't we? We could talk about David. We could talk about Saul. Does the Bible tell us something true about human nature? As Irv suggests, it may not be the only true thing in this regard, but is it in its own terms true? What can I know? Kant's question. I don't know if there was a Cain or an Abel or a Joseph, but can I know something about human nature? By the way, let's take a little vote here. How many think, maybe this is unfair, how many think that to this point the Bible knows about human nature? That we know something about human nature from not only do we believe it, we know it. The Bible gives us knowledge. How many feel that that's true? Okay. How many don't? I mean, okay, very good, Sid. Oh, I'm so glad you raised your hand. Easy unanimity is something we ought to avoid. Could you say something about that, Sid? Do you want to?
I would only say that I am very much informed by the way I was raised with the events that happened to me, and along the way how I wound up. I walked away from faith, I came back, and I'm still not always buying everything that people are selling. So for me, I'll always ask questions about the Bible. It will always be a fiction for me.
Okay, so you're saying that let's not somersault too quickly into an unqualified affirmation. Yes, we know that human nature is whatever we could say about it. You're willing to question even a strong attempt at affirmation.
I'm just going to say that every person has the right to either buy into it or not.
And you don't yet buy this claim.
Not lock, stock, and barrel. There are some things that I buy in the Bible, and there are a lot of things I don't.
Two things are wonderful here, I think. One is that I think we've uncovered something really powerful in the Bible, and it doesn't flinch from saying so. And yet, Sid's demurrer is an and yet. That we always have to have room for that we're overstating something, or that we're ignoring other realities, so that you retain some skepticism about bald assertions. And I think that's extremely healthy for our conversation. So I appreciate your doing that. Yeah, great. Okay, so there's something here about method. How do we go about discovering what's true in the Bible? And one of the ways of doing it is to be willing to ask, even against consensus, a question about it. So that helps us to get to get closer to the truth, because maybe we've gone too quickly too far. I like it. I like that. Malcolm?
I want to tie this comment back to something you said before. You shared that the book of Deuteronomy and the book of Job are hard to square.
Yeah.
They're offering conflicting perspectives.
Right.